It was 1992 and it was time when video games were actually good, albeit they were developed by small groups of people, unlike today when a game takes 5 years to make, thousands of people are working on it, and the outcome is usually utter rubbish. Flashback was developed by Delphin Software, a French company responsible for gems like Future Wars, Another World or Fade to Black. It was founded in 1988 by two Pauls, Paul Cuisset and Paul de Senneville, or something like that, and at the time of making Flashback, it consisted of just 10 people, which seems like a small team nowadays, but it was not at the time. It was an ordinary day and Delphin Software was approached by US Gold to make an action game for the Sega Mega Drive, which hadn't been released yet. The game was supposed to be based on the Godfather film, which seemed interesting enough, so they accepted and started working on the game. However, it was the age of Blade Runner and Terminator, and Paul was a huge fan of those films, as everybody else, so he decided to put the story in the future, and as the work on the game progressed, it became everything else but the Godfather. Paul showed his demo of the game to US Gold, and even though it was far cry from The Godfather, they actually fancied the demo and gave Paul the green light to crack on with the game. And thus, Flashback was born. It was released as Flashback: The Quest for Identity in the US and simply Flashback in the rest of the world. I haven't played it in donkey's years, but I still remember the first time I saw it at my mate, when I entered the room and he was sitting in a rocking chair he stole from his nana or something, and I looked at the telly and there was exactly this screen. I was instantly hooked. The game is a combination of a 2D platformer, action, shooter, adventure, puzzle solving, sci-fi, sort of cyberpunk thing. Detailed graphics, for the year, lifelike movements, astonishing music, fast action, a bit of a story, it was just perfect. Flashback was first released for Amiga and PC and later for about every platform under the sun. It was actually made for the Sega Mega Drive first, but since it took a lot of time to make cartridges, about 3 or 4 months, it came out on diskette and CD first. Also, the Amiga port was first because the Amiga 3000 was used for development, which took about 2 years. In 1993 it was released for the Sega Mega Drive and Super Nintendo, then for 3DO, Philips CDI, Acorn, Sega Mega CD or Sega CD in the US, Fujitsu FM Towns, NEC PC-98, Atari Jaguar and Apple Macintosh. In 2009 for iPhone, in 2015 for Amiga CD32, in 2017 for Sega Dreamcast, and in 2018 for everything that was current at the time. I'll compare each version later on in the review. In 1995, Delphin Software made a sequel called Fade to Black, which wasn't a platformer anymore, but it was a third-person shooter, and one of the first at that. In 2004 was made an attempt to make another sequel, or whatever it was supposed to be, for Game Boy Advance called Flashback Legends, which never came out, except for an early alpha. In 2013 Flashback Remake came out, but it was a massive flop. I played the game, but it was so horrible I didn't even finish it. And lastly, in 2023 came out Flashback 2, which wasn't my cup of tea either. Yeah, it was utter rubbish. The game's got many variations of the box cover, and even some sort of comics-like manual front page for the Genesis port. Also, the main menu's got lots of different looks. My favorites are Mega Drive and Super Nintendo. The graphics is of course dated, but I was drooling over it in 1992, or 3, or whatever. It was gorgeous. Actually, it still is, to some extent. I love attention to little details, like a gun's flashing on the Conrad's body or shells flying off his gun, or a little bit of smoke when a projectile hits something. Everything is beautifully hand-drawn from the background to the characters. For the character animations was used rotoscoping. It's a technique where a moving subject is captured on a film camera and then redrawn frame by frame. That's why the in-game characters move so lifelike. They didn't have funds for hiring an actual actor to film, so they took some cheap camera and a bloke from the team and filmed him. Delphin Software was proud of how many different moves the character can do, so they showcased some of them on the back of the Amiga gamebox. And for a good reason. The character moves great even for today, when some characters in new games move like planks of wood. Every level looks different, so the game is quite diverse. It's not boring and you don't have to look at the same stuff over and over again. That being said, all locations feel a bit abandoned or lonely. It wouldn't go amiss to put some life in the background. But maybe it would have been too hardware demanding back in the day. There's only one screen that feels a bit lively, and that's when you enter a bar. The game was supposed to be some sort of cinematic platformer, so you've got lots of cutscenes during the game to get you deeper into the story. There are two versions of the cutscenes, as there are two versions of the game. One version came out on console cartridges and diskettes, and the other version on a CD. While the diskette version uses vector graphics for the cutscenes, the CD version brought in CGI, which looks quite dated nowadays. Still cool though. Level design is excellent. Albeit you sometimes need to get some stuff and return where you came from to unlock something, it never feels repetitive or boring. It usually means that someone jumps you there or you need to do something new to get farther in the game. The music was composed by three blokes, now with perfect French incoming. Jean Baudelaire, Raphaël Gisquois, Fabrice Viscereau. I reckon I nailed it. Anyway, the music is simply outstanding, one of the best video game music ever. It perfectly fits in the game's setting and atmosphere and makes you immerse even more in the game. Literally every platform Flashback was released for uses different hardware to produce music, so at the end of the review I'm gonna compare the music of every port, so the video is gonna get a bit longer. Sound effects are also a bit different across the platforms, some sound better, some worse. The controls seem a bit similar to Prince of Persia or Another World at first, but if you ever played these two games, Flashback feels miles ahead. Actually, it feels miles ahead pretty much any platformer, old or new. It feels snappy, the character does exactly what he's supposed to do, and it's one of the features of the game that sucks you in and makes you one with the character. You've got a simple walk, run, roll, and various types of jumps. Again, I love the attention to detail. For instance, if you decide to change direction during running, Conrad makes a nice slide. It looks great and natural. In pretty much any other game, old or new, character just turns around instantaneously. Or when you run and there's a ledge or an end of a path, Conrad can fall down if you keep running, but if you stop on the edge, it looks like this. If you want to know the whole backstory, you need to read the manual. You don't get it in the game, but it's a nice reading, it's well worth it. In short, and without spoilers, you play as Conrad Hart, a GBI agent. GBI stands for Galaxy Bureau of Investigation. Right from the start you find out you've lost your memory and that you've got something to do with that because you sent yourself a message from the past. The message urged you to contact your friend Ian in Washington. But that's easier said than done, so you have to figure out a way there through a forest full of enemies. You recover your memory quite early in the game, which is a shame. This point of the story could have been explored a little bit more. Nevertheless, by recovering your memories, you find out there are aliens on Earth, disguised as humans, that want to destroy human population, and you, of course, are the only one who can stop them. If you feel like the premise reminds you something, it was inspired by Total Recall and Blade Runner. You'll go through 7 levels, from a forest and a city on a different planet, to Earth and of course the planet of the aliens. You'll fight lots of weird enemies, robots, corrupt coppers, some sort of replicants and of course aliens. There's also a part of the game where you have to get a job and work to make money you need to get to the next level. I love funny bits like when you need to get a work permit and you find yourself in a bureaucratic circle when one officer tells you to go to officer next to him, then one tells you to go to another one, and then one tells you to go to a boss. It's not dissimilar to the real world. Getting a work permit in the game virtually means getting a license to kill. To kill all those enemies, you've got a gun with unlimited ammo, shields which get depleted after a number of hits, the next hit is fatal naturally. Fortunately, the shield can be recharged in this machine. During the game you also find a force field, which is rather necessary to survive. It creates a force field around you for a very short period of time, during which it repels projectiles. Later in the game you'll get a teleporter, which will be needed to get to inaccessible parts or get you out of those. This part, being the first, is not as polished as the later ones. For instance, when you've picked up an item, you get this text, that you've picked up an item. The cutscenes can be enabled though by pressing Ctrl+C in the game or by installing the game to a hard drive instead of playing it from diskette. There's also a zoom function. When you press Ctrl+G in the game, it also zooms during the combat, but it's bloody horrible, so it was removed from the later port. Also, this is the only port that uses tracker music modules, which were a prominent music format on Amiga back in the day. Flashback came out for DOS on diskette as well as on a CD. The diskette version had the same vector cutscenes as the Amiga, however some of them were longer with additional scenes. The game uses either FM synthesis or LA synthesis for music. The CD version had CGI cutscenes with rearranged PCM music. What's weird is there's missing in-game music in the PC port for some reason, in both the diskette and the CD versions. By the in-game music I mean this. Speaking of music, the CGI cutscenes sound horrible. The music itself is excellent, but the sound quality is terrible. It's crackling like crazy, take a listen. This was supposed to be the first version. There are cutscenes when you're picking up items. It utilizes Mega Drive's FM synthesis for music, but there's also missing the in-game music in this port. This port looks pretty much the same as the rest. Since the Super Nintendo has sort of half wavetable, the music is a bit different, and sounds are very much different, not necessarily in a good way though. Also, some sound effects are missing, like this vent here for instance. Not sure why, but this port is the only port that uses music from this cutscene in another cutscenes, where it should be completely different music. And in this cutscene, there's utterly crappy and short music instead of the correct one. Another weird thing is that every other port uses English words as level passwords, give or take. This port though uses gibberish. Moreover, this is the only port where there's missing vowels when entering a password, that explains the gibberish. Also, this is the only port that runs rather slow compared to any other port, except for the PC where it's dependent on the CPU, naturally. What I've done is I've overclocked the CPU in the emulator and it runs, full stop. Cutscenes are extremely slow. The game runs fine most of the time, unless there's too many moving things around, or this fire, which is apparently quite hardware demanding. The 3DO port is very similar to the PC CD port, except for the video quality in the CGI cutscenes. The 3DO's got a bit of a raster over the video. However, it's got more colors and thus less banding. Also, the sound quality in the cutscenes is much better. And lastly, the main menu design is atrocious. The Philips CDI port is essentially the same thing as the 3DO port, but the CGI video quality is the same as on the PC CD. The port for Acorn looks and plays like all the other ports, there's really nothing special about it. There's only one interesting quirk: this is the only port that's got this cutscene for some reason. There's also a demo for Acorn which allows you to play a couple of minutes of the game and then gives you this message. This port looks and sounds very similar to any other CD port, except for a couple of things. The main menu looks even more dreadful than the one on the 3DO, as well as the CGI cutscenes. They look atrocious. They've got this horrible raster over them. I reckon the Mega CD's color palette is quite low to display it properly, and the hardware isn't powerful enough to handle the cutscenes in better quality, so it had to be tuned down a bit. What I love about this port though is music. And I don't mean the music in cutscenes or the action bits. This is the only port that's got music during the entire game, and a very good music at that. It perfectly works for the environment. Also, this is the only port that features voice acting during the game, not just cutscenes.
I'd like to speak to Jack.
Oh yeah? Jack's not here.
I've been sent by my friend Ian.
Okay, Jack's waiting for you outside.
Then I fired up the PC-98 port, and blimey, it is ugly. I'm not sure why, because the PC-98 is perfectly capable of running the game in its original look. It's not an emulator problem because it looks like this on an actual hardware I've got. The music is FM synthesis and not really good, so this port is overall very bad. This port was a big surprise to me. The game's in Japanese, obviously, since the FM Towns is a Japanese computer made for the Japanese market. The graphics is, again, the same as for any other port, and since it's for the FM Towns, it came out on a CD. When the game started, I expected the CGI intro, but I got this instead. Why is the game on a CD then, you ask? Well, CD audio tracks. But unlike the Mega CD port, the CD tracks are not there for the in-game music, but rather for the vector cutscenes. It's the only port with this sort of feature, and what's probably even more interesting, the tracks are rearranged by two Japanese blokes. Maybe Japanese didn't fancy the European mix or something. The Jack port is rubbish. The graphics is the same as the rest of the port, but the music is horrid. For some reason they used this horrendous music in a couple of different cutscenes, replacing the original tune. Also, I'm not sure if it's the problem with the emulator, but some cutscenes run too fast. The Macintosh port is very special. It came out on diskette and a CD, but unlike the FM Towns port, the CD version has the CGI cutscenes as every other CD port, but that's not really special, is it? What is special though here is graphics. It came out in 1995 and they boosted up the graphics a bit. It's got higher resolution, thus it's more detailed, and Conrad's got a face. At last. It looks cracking. This is the only port that features better graphics, not even later versions do for some reason. The game is in a higher resolution, so are the cutscenes in the floppy version. The CD version cutscenes though are apparently in the original resolution as they were on the PC, and instead of stretching them to a full screen, they run in a small window. That being said, they are the nicest looking of the bunch and the sound quality is the best as well.
The end of your thesis. Glasses which measure molecular density.
I don't have a Mac, so I can't test it without an emulator, but I've got this little problem with speed. Not sure if it's the Mac, the emulator or the game. The game's got two speed settings. You can turn on the full speed, which is too fast, or turn it off, which is too slow. I tried messing about with the emulator settings, but it's the same no matter what I turn on or off. This is a leaked ROM for an unreleased port. This was supposed to be some sort of sequel or whatever for Game Boy Advance, but it completely missed the mark. As you can see, it looks atrocious. It looks atrocious, it sounds atrocious, it moves atrocious, and most importantly, it plays atrocious. I know it's probably in an alpha stage, but this is just dreadful. No wonder they never released this abomination. It's got 16 levels and alright, some of them don't look that bad. Music, if you can call it that, is the same in every level and it's dreadful. I reckon the character was to be replaced by someone else, but at this stage it doesn't fit there and it's not really appealing. Moreover, controls are terrible. Controls are very similar to the original Flashback, but it reacts badly and it's not really enjoyable to control the character overall. The Dreamcast port is interesting though. It's an unofficial release. The Dreamcast was discontinued in 2001, so this port was released on a dead platform in 2017. As weird as it may sound, people were actually buying that for their Dreamcast. It sort of combines all the ports into one package. You can choose between the Vector and the CD version cutscenes, you can choose between the original and newly rearranged music, you can play about with some filters, but I fancy the original look. These filters always cook it up for me. You can even play emulated version for Sega Mega Drive. But it doesn't look good, it's too blurry. Another unofficial port that came out in 2015 was for Amiga CD32, but it's just the original Amiga port. There's nothing interesting about that, except for one little thing. The one who made the port stuck in the intro from the Flashback remake, which is quite weird because when you start a game, then you've got your regular intro, so in the end you've got two same intros. Moreover, it wouldn't go amiss to make it in a higher resolution, but it is what it is. And this is the last port for the vintage video game consoles. Now, if you feel like you don't want to play it on a console or an emulator, there is still a way. REminiscence is an unofficial port, or rather, rewritten engine from scratch for modern hardware. You can get the source code and compile it for whatever platform you want. To get it working, you need original data files from the PC or Mac port. If you've got the PC data files, it looks like the port for a PC. You can even choose between the diskette or the CD version cutscenes, or if you've got the Mac data files, you can play the enhanced, better looking version which doesn't suffer from the speed issue. For music, it uses either FM synthesis or you can feed it Amiga modules from Amiga port, which sound much better. You can even use voice acting file from the Mega CD port to get characters talking. Overall, it plays very much like the original Flashback but using modern hardware. This game was a disaster. Literally everything about the game is wrong. I usually despise remakes, and I hate this one with passion. I understand the cash grab scheme, but if you decide to remake something, even for a cash grab, make it at least a bit better than the original, but what would you expect from Ubisoft, right? Graphics is, well, higher resolution, but the characters move like someone disabled trying to walk again. That being said, original Flashback has got almost perfect controls. This one though, it's the exact opposite, it's horrible. The environment is alright, but the original, despite its age and low resolution, still looks better. The music was remade to a horrible mess, it's unlistenable. Dialogues are cheesy and stupid, and the game being made by a rubbish company, it of course holds your hands during the entire game, so you won't get lost or get your knickers in a twist for not finding a solution by yourself.
I should probably take the teleporter first.
The game's utter rubbish, and yes, it gets me knickers in a twist for remaking one of the best games into one of the worst. And there was the last port. One last thing, what you may have noticed from the footage I took, that in some ports Conrad's got white t-shirt, while in others red. I'm not sure why that is, but I felt like mentioning it. Since all of the platforms Flashback has been released for have different hardware, the music is a bit different on each of them. Well, the CGI cutscenes have the same music on every platform, but the vector cutscenes and the in-game music is a bit different. So let's listen to a little comparison. Flashback was and still is an excellent game that's got a simple, straightforward but an interesting story. It's not very long, you can finish the game in 2 or 3 hours if you know what you're doing. If it's your first time playing the game, probably 4 or 5. If you want to give Flashback a try, I'd recommend REminiscence with Meg data files and Mega CD voiceover files, it's the best port there is. Also, I recommend playing the sequel Fade to Black afterward, it's also an excellent game that's worth playing. And that about does it, have a great day, go play some Flashback and bye for now.